Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Anne Cameron, and I'm a curator at the Moving Image and Sound collections at the National Library of Scotland, based at Kelvin Hall. But tonight you'll see I'm not at Kelvin Hall, I'm in my front room, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you some lovely images of Scotland in the wild from the Moving Image Archive. I'm going to take in a 10-minute ramble around the collection, although it might turn into a scramble. And I'm going to introduce you to part of the collection that shows you Scottish landscapes, wildlife, and the people who interact with them over the last 115 years. I'll also signpost the variety of records that we preserve in film, video, and born digital moving image, and why I think these are very important. I'll maybe have some time to introduce you to our online catalogue, how you can quickly search the catalogue or browse it, and also enjoy viewing films from the comfort of your own home. I noticed that we've got some attendees from across the pond tonight. We've got people from America, Mexico, Italy, and Scotland, and everywhere in between. So I do hope you can understand my accent, and that if you have any questions, I'd like to encourage you to put them into the Q&A box on Zoom. And my colleagues Jo and Kenny, who are supporting this event, they'll be able to collect them, and we should have time for a bit of a Q&A at the end where you can quiz me further. So, without further ado, when my colleagues asked if I'd put together a nature film themed talk, my immediate thought was, what exactly is a nature film, and do we have many of them in the archive? The librarian in me immediately reached for the Library of Congress genre form guide to see if there was such a thing as a nature film, and right enough, the following rather dry description surfaced. A non-fiction work concentrating on the world of plants, insects and animals, accounts of life in the wild, and how the ecosystems are formed with each species interacting with one another, and often presented in an anthropomorphized manner. So that's a big word. But really, to me, it's more than that. The collection as a whole represents Scotland. Most films we have in the archive have some part of the natural environment or people interacting with it, whether that's in the town or the country. So I think that really nature films are so varied in the archive, and that's what I really want to get across to you tonight. We do preserve large collections of documentary film in the archive. For example, we have the Films of Scotland collection, we have the Educational Films of Scotland collection, and also the Scottish Amateur Film Festival collection. And Scotland's got a very strong tradition of amateur filmmaking. For example, John Grierson used to judge the Amateur Film Festival. Alfred Hitchcock came up. So there was always this kind of overlap between the professional and the amateur world. And I think that through the films in the archive, you do see a very talented amateur filmmaking tradition. But we also have people like Oscar Marzaroli, Bill Forsyth, Eddie McConnell. We have composers, we have artists, we have all sorts of people that are involved in filmmaking in the collection. And I think that comes across in the way that the films are made. There are films sponsored by the National Trust for Scotland, Scottish Natural Heritage, or even the Scottish Youth Hostel Association. But the films that I always find raise my own curiosity are works made by the amateur enthusiast. A recent addition to the catalogue has to have my favourite current title, British Carnivorous Plants. I can just imagine these plants coming to eat the person that's filming them. But that was actually made by a natural history curator at Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, the place that's actually opposite us at Kelvin Hall. He was called Charles Palmer, and he created detailed diagrams and close-ups of these plants. And these are a very important record, I think. There's also women filmmakers represented in the collection. We have a lady called Elsie Cairns, who made quite a lot of educational films. They would have been used in the classroom. And I think the enthusiasm that she brings across in her films are really good. And you'll see one of her films in my showreel later. For example, she made a film called The Slavonian Grebe, which I think is another fab title. It's an educational film featuring that rare bird. And I actually found out that's on the RSPB's Red Register of Conservation Concern. So we do have records of animals and plants that maybe are in danger now, and these are important historical records. But apart from that, I think I also want to sort of indicate the variety of the collection. We have the Scottish Screen Collection, which is quite a contemporary collection of Scottish film production in the archive. You can view that on site at Kelvin Hall. So for example, there's a film called The Flight of the Sand Martin, and that was made in 2008, and it tracks the journey of a refugee from Africa to Scotland, and it parallels it with the flight of a San Martin bird. So these sort of things are quite interesting to dig into the archive and find. There's also debates recorded back to this during the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, and that explores the debate around fracking in Scotland. So we do have quite important records of how people reacted and thought of environmental changes in the country. We've got artistic films, how people like Andy Goldsworthy or Ian Hamilton Findlay interpret nature. And we even have a video of a Scottish ballet performance which engages with the theme of wildlife. So there's quite a range, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm casting this net very wide tonight. It's not just about the anthropomorphised film or whatever the Library of Congress are talking about. It's also about all these other things that people enjoy. So 3 main points really that I just want to pick up on. The films in the archive are often educational or scientific in style. Films were often used as teaching aids. Some of you may remember being at school and hearing the whir of the 16mm projector. These films offer a reliable and unbiased record of the world we live in or our predecessors. But film is very emotive as well, and it can persuade, act as a call to action, or simply make us think about the natural world in a different or a new way. Films can have an agenda, and one of the benefits of having a moving image archive in Scotland is the objective manner in which we present them on the catalogue. So we give the context, we talk about the way, we give the context of the time, and we also present any accompanying documentation. So people are left to make their own decisions about how they feel about the film, but we present the film as it is. Films are nostalgic as well. Often it's the older silent black and white films that seem to paint a picture of the great Scottish outdoors as it used to be. But was that really like that? Did people really hike up hills in their kilts? It's really up to the people engaging with the collection to make that decision and to see the evidence, and that is what film can be. It's evidence of times past and how we interacted with nature. A question that sometimes we are asked is why bother collecting film and video and putting it in the national collection? And I think that nature films are one of those things that people may feel that landscapes don't change. Why do we collect these sort of films? But I think the more you engage with the collection, the more you see the importance. You can't always see it at the time, but maybe in 100 or 200 years, these records will be seen as really valuable records of how the world was at that time. As early as 1944, the then director of the British Film Institute, Oliver Bell, wrote to the journal Nature in a letter entitled The Importance of Film Records, where he noted that a number of amateurs are making films frequently of unique scientific interest, and he asks if we should be doing more to preserve them. And I still feel that's the case today. We have to make the case for these sort of records to be preserved. They offer us a record of changing ecology and landscape that we can look back on in years to come. They also record things that are gone. For example, recently, working with the Grampian television collection, I discovered some records of the Bankery Institute of Terrestrial Ecology. They worked with lots of animals like otters and other wildlife, and it was actually razed to the ground in 1991. So you can see that there's records there that might be of interest to people in the future. Video in particular is an at-risk format, and we need to act now to digitise it for the future, for preservation rather. We are working to save these important records of Scotland before the tapes just simply won't play back. And I think that that's a point to be made as well, that we're trying to preserve some records before they really disintegrate. What I would like to do now is just take you on a whirlwind tour of the catalogue and how you may be able to see these films because we're very fortunate in Moving Image that we do have quite a big digitisation programme at the moment, and it's a good way to be able to share the collection with people, not only at the library but across the world. One thing I would say is that the talk tonight is going on YouTube after, a recorded version, so I have been a bit restricted in what I can pick to show you just because of copyright, but I've still found some really great examples. I'd encourage you to check out the online catalogue. You can look at that at movingimage.nls.uk, and you can also engage with it via the National Library's library search, which is on the homepage of the National Library website, nls.uk. You can search across shortlists, you can use keywords, you can find place, you can find people, you can find any word that you want to find. And we do find that it's quite a rich data set and that people do find it quite useful. You can also browse, which I'll show you in a minute. But one of the things that this talk prompted was a new genre term, as I said, nature. So there are over 100 films now that are grouped together in that genre term that you can look at. You can also enjoy themed selections on the website, so you can look at things like 15 films about the great outdoors or natural Scotland, and I think that's quite a nice wee introduction to the collection. So just to show you the catalogue, this is what you would come to when you come to the catalogue, and it's the homepage. We try and be quite visual in the catalogue and give you that kind of themed selection as you enter the catalogue. But if I move this, what you can also see is things like search and browse options. You can find out more about the archive and its work, and you can also collect films. So if you're a registered user of the National Library, you can collect films and you can keep going back to them and adding to them, and it's kind of your little potted research bucket that you can have films in. So I'll show you a little bit about the search and browse. So this is the search and browse page, and this is where you can input your keywords in this search box here, or you can, down the left hand side, you can filter by different facets. So for example, you could see what films are available on the library premises or off the library premises. And I think for the purposes of tonight, if you're sitting in Mexico, you just go to the available remotely option, and then you'll see films that you can actually watch. You can also browse by various other options such as decade, place, subject, genre, and also limit by colour or original format. So it's quite a versatile search. I don't have much chance to go into detail, but you can see you can mix the search term with some genre terms. So you may want to find colour films from the 50s that feature the Pine Marten. You should be able to combine that into your search. This is just a wee example that I found of a series browse. So that you can see is seasons in Scotland. And if you look at the series options, you'll see a lot of different options and you can click on them and you'll get little potted sets of films. So this was actually a wee educational series that was shown in schools, and it shows the different seasons in Scotland. That's quite a nice introduction to some of the colour film from that period. And then there's an example of a film record, and that is basically where we would put all the metadata and the information about a record. So titles, dates, and also things like descriptions and any related records. And you can see here we've got the film is digitised and available to view. You can also inquire about it through this page and maybe order it if you were a production company or a member of the public. So it's quite a versatile display. There's also a shortlist which you can't see here, which would give you a very detailed description of the content of the film as well. So the only thing I would say is that if you come to the library itself, you will get much more. You'll get over 1,000 more films to watch. So for example, broadcast television collections from Scottish TV, Grampian, and also the MG Alba Gaelic collections are available on site. And things like contemporary production, so short films and features and things like that are available to view at the library premises. And also all the other library digital collections. So that ranges from books, music, maps, newspapers, journals, electronic sources. There's so much to explore. So if you do have the opportunity to visit the library, I would encourage you to do that. And we are actually opening the Kelvin Hall to the public next Tuesday, the 22nd. So you can find out more about that on our website. But I think for now, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to start my film show and just show you some films that I've put together for you tonight. This is an amateur film, and I think it just shows you the, I don't know if you saw the start, but there was a wee boy climbing a tree and they were skating on the pond. And I think the great thing about these sort of films is it really shows the memories that it can evoke for people, because most people have home memories of being children and growing up, and these films are very good at evoking those memories. And it also shows the hobbies that people enjoy. So for example, you can see they're actually motorbiking all over the landscape, so you can see how people use the landscape in these sort of films as well. This is part of a collection that was gifted to Perth and Kinross Archive and shot in standard 8mm film. So you can see it's quite amateur, it's got little marks on it and things, but that's just the nature of the film.
The forester learns to know the tree in all its moods, from its shimmering dress of spring to its protecting mantle of winter, as the home of the thrush and the squirrel, and as the inspiration of the poet and artist that is within us all.
Molehills like this are a familiar sight to people who travel about our countryside. Farmers don't like molehills on their land. They destroy good pasture. Gardeners hate them too. How would you like to try and keep grass paths and edges with moles making heaps of soil all over the place like this? Yet one pair of moles could have done all this damage, for they are very voracious eaters and are constantly hunting about underground in their search for worms as food. Down in the bog, here is a huge molehill, the winter quarters of the mole. See how big it is in comparison with the others. We were very fortunate indeed, we thought one day, when we found this little mole running about in the lane, for moles are seldom, if ever, seen above ground. We had no idea where he was going, but followed along, because for once we had our cameras in our hands and were at the ready. This was actually taken in slow motion. In reality, a mole moves about 3 times more quickly. Into our own garden it went, and now you were seeing it at normal speed. Whenever it started to dig like this, of course, we thought it was about to disappear. But no. Was it hunting on the surface for beetles? Or what was keeping it above ground like this? It dashed towards a mole heap, and we caught it quickly, just to let you see its strong forefeet, those powerful digging feet. Then put it down beside a hole, and thought when it went out of sight that, of course, that was that. It had gone for good. But a few minutes later, here it was, coming out of another hole onto the surface again. We couldn't find out what it was eating or why it was there.
Handa Island, only 1.5 miles square. A wild place of coarse grazing. Bracken, heather, bogland, lochans. Today, the island supports a few sheep and tolerates the visiting naturalists. But it wasn't always so. People used to live here, though over 100 years of wind and weather have almost obliterated their traces. Mainlanders too were buried in this graveyard, away from prowling wolves. Now it's all but overgrown, and the people but a memory. There were never many people, 12 families at the last official count in 1845, crofters living off fish from the sea and potatoes from the lazy beds they heaped up on small cultivated patches. It's difficult to imagine a whole family in each little house. Every day the islanders met. They held a parliament and shared out the work, digging peat for the fire, working seaweed into the fields, putting the boats out to sea for the fishing. Even then, visitors here had to accept some rules because the islanders of Handa had their own elected queen. Self-sufficient in their isolation, they had organized a tight matriarchal society. It's significant their queen was usually the oldest widow, for the men of the island risked their lives fishing the wild Atlantic and harvesting Handa's special asset, its seabirds. They climbed for food, birds and eggs for themselves, feathers to trade with the men. Deserted by man, Handa now belongs only to the birds.
The Kulins are the glory of Skye. Wherever one goes, their jagged peaks stand up against the clouds. They are a strong attraction to climbers, for there are about 20 peaks of 3,000 feet above sea level within an area of 8 square miles.
The sylvan lakes of England with summer sunshine kissed, I'd rather have the Cullens and their damp grey mist. On the Cullens and the sunshine and the Cullens and the rain, with the wild nor'wester shrieking adown the misty glen, and the whaups upon the mountainside a-screeching to the blast, and the fearful shadows rushing from the heavy storm clouds cast, with the sleet so sharply lashing like the keen blade of a knife. Oh, a storm in the Cullens is like a breath of life. The blue-green lakes of England may please the English eye, but give to me the Cullens in the misty Isle of Skye.
The gardens at Brodick were begun by the Duchess of Montrose a few years after the end of the 1914-18 war. In the walled garden, mixed primula polyanthus bloom in an abundance of colour. Castle and gardens are now in the care of the National Trust for Scotland. Hydrangea villosa, the lace cap with its pink and purple petals of a different shape and shade. Watsonia. A bloom of medieval splendor.
Pollock is now ours to enjoy from one year's end to the next. Pollock Park remains as near to a state of nature as discreet management will allow. With a world of wildlife on our doorstep, we have to come to it naturally. For some of the shy but hardy residents, this undisturbed setting of woodland and field is a unique habitat. Winter gives way to spring, Pollock comes into its own glory. More visitors are tempted out to make the most of the still short daylight hours.
Landscape and I get on together well. Though I'm the talkative one, still he can tell his symptoms of being to me, the way a shell murmurs of oceans. Lochranach lapses wimpling in the sun. Its hieroglyphs of light fade one by one, but recreate themselves, their message done, forever and ever. That sprinkling lark, jerked upward in the blue, will daze to nowhere, but leave himself in true translation. Hear his song cascading through his disappearance. The hawk knows all about it, shaking there an empty glove on steep shoots of the air, till his yellow foot cramps on a squeal, to tear smooth fur, smooth feather. This means, of course, Schiehallion in my mind is more than mountain. In it he leaves behind a meaning, an idea, like a hind couched in a corrie. So then, I'll woo the mountain till I know the meaning of the meaning, no less. Oh, there's a Schiehallion anywhere you go. The thing is, climb it.
Okay. I hope you can all hear me again. In the spirit of McCaig's poem, I'd invite you to explore the Moving Image Archive, indeed to climb it. We know that there are gaps in our collecting in this area, and with the library's new collection development policy, we are keen to preserve all sorts of professional, amateur and creative work concerning Scotland and the world that we find ourselves in. So I'd ask you to engage, criticise and improve this fantastic resource, and I hope you've enjoyed the show.